Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining us today. Uh, we are happy to welcome today our captioning done by our captioner Francisco and ASL interpretation provided by Emily and Michael. And all of the service providers are from Partners Interpreting. If you would like to follow the captions in a separate device or a new window, you can follow this link. That link is going to be in the chat. And if you need help accessing the captions or ASL interpretation, please type a message in the Q&A or chat so we can do so. I'm Sarah Glidden. Welcome to our webinar today. I'm the program manager for our organizations team, and I work with portfolio organizations and the Operating Grants for Organizations programs. I'm joined today by my colleagues Lindiana Flores, who leads the Card to Culture program and is also the staff contact for some of the Operating Grants for Organizations recipients. She's going to be throwing some links in the chat while I talk. And we're also joined by Lillian Lee, who leads our Gaming Mitigation Fund, works with portfolio organizations and the cultural affiliates and the operating grants for organizations. Lillian's going to be managing questions that are in the Q&A. So really delighted to have their support today with us. Just our agenda for today: introductions and session overview, a program overview of the grant program, the grantee requirements, and then specifically talking about the annual report, grant amounts for next year, timeline, and questions. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please put your questions into the Q&A, not into the chat. If you put it into the chat, we might miss them. We will pause periodically just to check and see if there are questions that need to be responded to. So if you could, please keep your questions focused on the thing we are currently talking about, and then open it up widely at the end to any questions that we haven't addressed throughout the presentation. As I mentioned before, we'll be putting links in the chat whenever I talk about something where there is a link that is an appropriate resource for that. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the slide deck will be sent to all of the Operating Grants for Organizations recipients in the next couple of days. So whether or not you registered and attended today, we're still going to send it out to you. So our program overview. First of all, congratulations to all of you. You are recipients in the Operating Grants for Organizations, which is our primary funding program that supports cultural organizations with unrestricted operating support. The first round of this grant program ran last year, so you are recipients in the very first round of this program. This program was designed following evaluation of our previous funding for cultural organizations and as a response to both the agency's racial equity plan and to the Mass Cultural Council values as expressed in our most recent strategic plan. I know that some of these organizations who are with us today are folks who were previously funded through our portfolio grant program, which is being phased out. So we're having this session today because we know that Mass Cultural Council multi-year funding is new for many of you, and we want to make sure that we answer all of your questions about how you get grants for the future and other aspects of this program. So the exciting thing is that the Operating Grants for Organizations for the folks who applied last year and got funded for fiscal 25, it's a 5-year grant. You will be receiving a grant for fiscal 26, 27, 28, and 29. And congratulations again. This has been changed, so organizations that are currently applying for funding to begin in fiscal 26, it will be a 4-year grant. And that's changed because the applications will now be open in alternating years. So the next application will not happen until calendar 2027. FY27, it will be alternating with the Youth Reach grant program, which will have an open application next year. This is an unrestricted grant, which means that any of your expenses can be covered by the funds you receive through this grant program. You can use it to pay off past debt, you can use it to build reserves, you can use it to pay program staff, utilities, office supplies, absolutely anything. For grants of over $7,000, 80% of the grant is paid when the contract is executed. By executed, we mean you have signed it and we have countersigned it and then uploaded the signed agreement to your account in our grants management system. The remaining 20% of this grant is paid after the annual reports are reviewed, and that'll be in June. So you'll get the final payment sometime in June, but we can't give you a specific date. There's no requirement to provide receipts or other documentation on how you have spent the funds. That is one of the joys of an unrestricted operating support grant. So your requirements for receiving the grant. First and most importantly is you will have to complete an annual report, and that will include uploading your most recent 990 or 990 EZ. And the annual reports are due on June 3rd, no later than June 3rd. You are required to give credit to the Mass Cultural Council for supporting your organization, and we have a link to the requirements around that. That's also in your grant contract. Finally, you need to remain eligible for this grant program. And that three important elements of that. First of all, you need to maintain a minimum 3-year average of expenses of over $50,000. So that means when we average out the 3 most recent fiscal years that you have reported on, that mathematical average is $50,000 or more. You need to maintain a primary mission and programming in the arts, humanities, and sciences, and at least 50% of that programmatic activity has to take place in Massachusetts. And your incorporation and IRS tax status must remain active and not be revoked. These were all requirements for you to apply for the grant program, so you need to maintain that eligibility throughout the duration of your grant. I'm just going to pause for a second before I get into the annual report and see if there were any questions about the grant itself or about the grant requirements for you, the grantees.
There are no questions on that, but I actually do think one of the questions will open this section really well. When do the annual reports open up to get filled out?
That is an excellent question. So the annual reports become available in your grants management Smart Simple account once the contract is executed. And I know that the great majority of contracts have been executed. I know there's a few of them that we're still, chasing down signatories and documentation. We will make sure that the annual report is available to you at the beginning of May, even if for some reason your grant contract has not yet been executed. But most of you should be able to find it right now. And honestly, it is, as annual reports go, it is not a terribly painful annual report. A lot of it is administrative. First of all, we need you to confirm that you are still eligible, and we need you to update any contact information so that we know the right people to reach out to. We need you to update the signatory names, contact names for your grant. And as I said before, you need to provide your most recent 990 or 990 EZ. And a 990N, which is the postcard filing for organizations with under $50,000 in revenue, is not accepted for this annual report. If you are a cultural affiliate, and cultural affiliates are organizations that operate under a larger non-eligible organization. And these can be programs at colleges and universities, or programs at social service organizations, or in some cases, programs through municipalities. If you are a cultural affiliate, you will, instead of uploading a 990 for the parent organization, you will complete a financial reporting form. Next, you have to answer questions that deal with your attendance and participation and expenses. This is required by the National Endowment for the Arts. And what's a little strange about this particular annual report is the National Endowment requires us to get this information from you for the current grant year, the current fiscal year, which is July 1st of 2024 through June 30th of 2025. Obviously, if this is due on June 3rd, you're going to have to estimate your attendance and expenses that take you through the end of this particular fiscal year. So it's not your fiscal year, it's the National Endowment for the Arts fiscal year. The information that you provide in the section of National Endowment for the Arts questions is then aggregated with all of the other responses from organizations, and it's part of our annual reporting requirements to the NEA. The rest of the annual report is actually asking you questions about your own most recently completed and reported fiscal year. So you just have to note the sections that are about the NEA questions, and that is, there's explanatory text in the annual report. If you miss the June 3rd deadline, there will be a penalty to the grant that you receive for fiscal 26. You get a 1-week extension through June 10th. If you miss the June 10th deadline, you will not receive a grant for fiscal 26. If that happens, you still need to meet your annual requirements to get the grant for fiscal 27. So it doesn't kick you out permanently, but it does either penalize or remove your grant for fiscal 26. So a question, where is the annual report? Once your contract is executed, the annual report pops up on your dashboard. So when you sign in to the Mass Cultural Council's grants management system, this is representative of the screen that you will see, and you can see down there, it says requires attention, and under pending reports, it's for this organization, it's one pending report. So you click on that, and that is where you find the annual report. A question we get a lot is, how do I know which fiscal year I'm supposed to report on? So when you go into that grants management system, I'm going to go back one slide. You can see in the upper right corner, organization profile. Click on organization profile, and then you will get this screen, which has a variety of tabs. You can update address information. You can see who your staff contact is right there, the third tab over. That'll tell you if your staff contact is me or Lillian or Lindiana. And then the first big thing that I've circled there, grant expiration year. So that tells you that you'll be funded through fiscal 29. That's always helpful to know, so you'll know when it needs to be on your radar to consider applying for future support. And then the second big block there, annual required financial report. And this is the fiscal year you should report on. It's either going to say FY24 or FY23. And the year that is there is based on what year you submitted in your application last year. So if last year you gave us your fiscal 23 reporting as part of the application, now we require your fiscal 24. And then finally, once you submit your annual report, we will review it. We'll check off all the information, make sure that everything is complete. And then we, the staff, manually change this field of required reporting completed. Once we have reviewed what you have submitted, we will change that from please select to yes. If you miss the June 3rd deadline, this will show up as no. So you can see that in your own account in our grants management system. This is a question that we get a lot. What do you do if you won't have your 990 in time to submit it for the annual report? And what we have done is we have set up a policy for how to handle this. It requires you providing us with certain financial documentation and letters explaining that your 990 is delayed. We're going to be sending you lots of reminders about the annual report deadline. And the reminders will include what you need to do if you're not going to have your 990 or 990 EZ in time to report by June 3rd. What you're going to do is reach out to your staff contact, and we will then send you the instructions of what you need to send to us so that you will have met the deadline. So again, if you won't have your 990 in time, it's not a crisis and you won't get a penalty as long as you follow our instructions for what to submit to us in its place. And you still need to complete and submit the rest of the annual report on time, June 3rd, 2025. Questions on that?
Hi, Sarah. So I have one
Yeah.
specific annual report question, and then a couple questions going back a bit, but they have been asked
Okay.
a couple times, so I want to get them
Okay.
in. The
Great.
first one is, when and how will the fiscal year 26 contract be executed? Will we have to submit a renewal application or something similar, or will it be automatic?
Great question. The wonderful thing here is that your annual report really functions as and you can't see my air quotes, but it functions as the application for next year's grant. So once you've done your annual report, you are now in the process of receiving your fiscal 26 grant. And I'm going to go into details about the timeline in just a moment, so I'm going to hold off on that.
Great, thank you. And then another question that's been asked a couple times is, would
Mhm.
grant amounts change each year based on the increases or decreases in operating budget?
Another great question, and I'm going to get to that in just a second about how the grant amounts are calculated.
Great. And then was the 5-year repeating gift written in our contract? I want to make sure we are entering proper accounting.
Oh, that's a really great question. So this is really getting into the weeds of how the business works, but Mass Cultural Council's budget is redetermined annually. And all of our contracts are also redetermined annually. So the grant contract that you received was for one specific year's grant. You will receive another contract for the next year's grant. So although our commitment to you is for multi-year support, the contract is a 1-year contract. And then we issue you another contract for the following year. And just to give a little more framing, this is all contingent on Mass Cultural Council's annual budget, the allocation that comes from the legislature through their annual budgeting for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and then also how Mass Cultural Council's leadership and the governing board, the governing council of Mass Cultural Council approves a spending plan for the following year. So there are some things that have to be redetermined annually. For how you account for that, you should really speak to your own uh, accountant. But as I said, each year is a separate contract. So it is unlikely that they would ever expect you to account for that in 1 year, one fiscal year. It'll be each year individually. So the question that was the big question, grant amounts. how are they calculated? And the question about your own organization's annual expenses is spot on. What we'll do, we calculate a 3-year average of your expenses. So you had to provide 3 years of reporting as part of your application. We do a mathematical average of the 3 years. And then each year we will drop off the oldest year and add in your new year. So logically, as your organization either grows or shrinks, your cash expenses would also increase or decrease. The advantage of doing a 3-year average is that it really smooths out any unusual or one-time bumps or decreases in your expenditures. Secondly, most important thing, the legislative appropriation to Mass Cultural Council. As we said, we're a state agency. Our funding comes through the annual state budget, plus a portion that comes from the National Endowment for the Arts. Thirdly, the funds that are allocated to this specific grant program, and that's part of the annual spending plan for the agency. Then the grant maximums and minimums. We've announced that this past year grants ranged between $6,000 and $55,000. Those numbers are subject to change in years when we have seen significant increases in our annual operating budget. We have increased those numbers, but that is up for consideration on an annual basis. And then finally, equity impact points, and these are points that are built into the formula calculation process. There are increases for organizations that have completed the BIPOC-centered self-identification form, and also work that we have done internally on financial health analysis. So we have taken the 990s for the organizations and developed a, a mathematical system for looking at the 3 years of surpluses or deficits and reserves and mapped financial health indicators. There's a small bump for organizations that appear to be more financially fragile. And this is a number that will be reviewed annually. So, that could go away for organizations that have received it. It could come in for organizations that appear more challenged. And it's also a reflection of the full grantee pool. So it's a calculation we do of the entire 155 or so organizations that were funded in year 1. Year 2, it'll be you folks, the organizations that were funded in the first cycle, plus organizations that are funded in the second cycle of the program. But getting back to the intent of the original question about, if your expenses go up, would that increase your grant amount? It is likely that would happen. It's also relative to the other organizations that are in the calculation pool. So if all of the organizations see an increase in their expenses, then the impact on any one particular organization is probably less. If most organizations saw expenses that did not change, but your expenses actually went up significantly, then yes, it's all about each organization relative to the full pool of grantees being calculated. I'll get into the timeline, but first pause and see if there were any questions for me to go back over on that topic.
Yes, a couple of questions on the annual report again, just going back a little bit.
Sure.
One, as a small organization with only one full-time employee,
Mhm.
are there ever extensions allowed for the deadline in case of extenuating circumstances?
Really no. Um, it's tightly tied to our own internal processes and our need to have the information in place for us to do the work to prepare for the following year. The extension is around the 990 or 990 EZ. I really think you're going to find that the annual report is not the heavy lift that many reports are, and it certainly is nothing like the application itself. But if you are going to have problems with the 990 or 990 EZ, like I said, we have a policy in place for you to provide alternative documentation to us. And just a little more context on that. You'll provide alternative documentation. We will use that documentation as we calculate the following year's grant, but we will not release the grant to you until you have provided us with the 990 or 990 EZ on time with an extension deadline that we give you only for the tax reporting. If at that point your 990 comes in with lower expenses than you projected through the alternative reporting process, this possibility that the grant amount would be adjusted downward to align with the correct 990 information. It will not go up, but only go down. But no, I can only think of one time in my 14 years here, 11 years here, that there has been an extension, and that was a situation where the leader of the organization passed away. So it's a pretty unusual circumstance. That's one of the reasons we are so insistent about the June 3rd deadline, and why we will send you so many reminders to get it completed in time. Any other questions? No. There's no other questions. I'll jump into the timeline.
Sorry, Sarah, I was
Oh,
muted but
so sorry.
talking.
Okay.
As a follow-up to one of the previous questions, where does it say in writing that our organization is slated to receive an annual gift for 5 years?
It said it in the guidelines when you applied last year. It is not in the contract because, again, the contract is a one-year contract that is renewable. But it's in the guideline, and in this year's guidelines, it announces that it's a 4-year multi-year support grant. But last year it was 5 years.
Okay, one question that I'm a little confused by the construction of the question, but I think what they're asking is, will you take a draft audit for fiscal year 24 if that's all that they have by 4/17? A
First of
draft
all,
990,
sure.
sorry.
We have accepted drafts, assuming that this is, that it is a draft that is simply awaiting the approval of the organization's board before being submitted, or waiting for a final review by their audit committee. But it should not be, an imaginary document.
Okay, and then final question on that. For an organization that has an internal fiscal year that is different than the Mass Cultural Council,
Mhm.
would you recommend changing our fiscal year to better
Oh,
align our 990 and other reporting tracking?
truly, no. Your fiscal year should be what is most appropriate for your own organization's operations. We will definitely have organizations that will be reporting their fiscal 23 numbers to us and not their fiscal 24, because that aligns most appropriately with their own organization's operations. I think of organizations that have a December 31st fiscal year, particularly if they are large or financially complex, the possibility that they would have their 990 completed in time to submit to us for the early June deadline, really challenging. So a lot of those organizations are actually submitting their tax documents from the previous year. But your if you need to change your fiscal year because that is the most effective thing for your own operations, absolutely do it. And you let us know so that we make sure that we don't include a short fiscal year or an overly long fiscal year as part of our formula calculation.
Okay, those are all the questions related to that. We have a couple other questions that I'll bring up at the end.
Okay, thank you. So key dates, annual report available. Like I said, for most of you, it is already available because it became available in your grants management system account when the contract was executed. But it will be there no later than early May because our support team will override that part of the process and simply make it available in your account. That annual report is due Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025, submitted by midnight. It's time-stamped. We will know when it came in, and the system will shut down. What happens then is we take all that information, we do our necessary calculations, and we wait for the Massachusetts legislature to complete their annual budgeting process. All of that feeds into our calculations, and in late August, our governing council meets and approves the spending plan for the fiscal year. Like I said, that will happen in late August so that we can make grant announcements in early September. You will get a notification in early September, assuming that everything works on its traditional timeline. Certainly during the pandemic, the legislature was very delayed in establishing the budget. We couldn't make our determinations until the budget was completed, so everything got delayed. But our planning is that by early September, we will have notified you of your grant amount for fiscal 26. And then our fiscal team starts the process of actually issuing the contracts for all the grants. And our fiscal team actually ends up dealing with thousands of contracts. So they roll this out one program at a time, and we have no impact on what program gets rolled out first. And then I'm going to bounce ahead. Just when we send this out to you, there is a slide with useful links, a link to the email that reaches our team, the phone number that is our shared team. There's a contracts page in our guidelines published on the web that talks about the process for contracts to be issued, link to the actual program guidelines, and then a link to the credit and publicity kit, which has logos and other guidance about how to credit Mass Cultural Council in your materials. But going back to questions.
All right, first question is, if we're ready to submit the annual report in April, is there any reason not to submit it early?
You may certainly submit it now. Just be aware that in those NEA questions, since you are projecting through the end of June, we want those numbers to be as accurate as they can reasonably be, knowing that you are working with projections. For some organizations, that's really clear, and for other organizations, filing in April would be you know, unlikely. So, but if you're an organization that can, you know, really dependably project through the end of the fiscal year to answer those questions, go ahead and submit. Just want you to know it will not change when your organization receives the final 20% of your grant amount, because my team, Lindiana and Lillian and I, will be reviewing all of those annual reports in June. And that is what will trigger the payment of the final 20%. Anything
Okay.
else? Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
A few other questions.
Mhm.
Can an organization that received the operating support in fiscal 25 apply for the grant now known as Creative Experiences?
Sadly, no. The the Mass Cultural Council is definitely moving to a policy of one grant to an organization, accepting the Cultural Facilities Fund program, which operates separately. You can actually see in the FAQ for um, the current year's application, there's a wonderful chart that helps explain, you know, if you are receiving this grant, is there anything else that you are eligible for? But no, if you are receiving either a portfolio grant or an operating grant for fiscal 26, you may not apply for creative experiences.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. Sorry, just finishing typing that response.
Okay.
We've had a few questions asking about recent federal changes and
Hmm.
executive orders and the changes to the NEA. And so I was wondering if you could speak about Mass Cultural's position and how
Yeah,
that does or does not impact future grants.
great question. Um, so obviously it is unusual circumstances that we are in currently. The National Endowment for the Arts had uh, issued statements about requirements for receiving National Endowment for the Arts funding. A group of organizations filed a lawsuit against the National Endowment for the Arts. They have removed, for now, they have removed the language that was problematic. Um, so as of right now, there is no indication that that should be a concern, but it is a frequently changing landscape, and we have no predictions on what might come next for that. Uh, our executive director, Michael Bobbitt, had a blog post on our website, and I'm sorry I didn't include the link for that, but um, we can certainly attach it to this document. But that blog post was about our own affirmation and confirmation of our commitment to our values and vision for the role of Mass Cultural Council. And I do not see Mass Cultural Council backing off of that. It's strongly held convictions. Um, there's also information on the website of the Attorney General. Uh, Massachusetts Attorney General, I think along with 16 other attorneys general, issued a statement around restrictions on language and policies, and that is on the Attorney General's website. Um, so is there uncertainty? Yes, but we are holding firm to our values.
Okay. And the final couple of questions are about Youth Reach grants. How can you have both simultaneously? Can you apply to Youth Reach if you have an operating support grant?
Okay, so the policy ultimately will be that your organization receives either Youth Reach or the operating grants for organizations. Fiscal 26 is sort of a transition year, and I don't want to try to recap what the transition year means for that. But if you have been working with Kata Swabeck, she can give you guidance on that. If you are an organization that has been receiving both operating support and a Youth Reach grant, in the next calendar year, you'll be reapplying for Youth Reach. And at that point, when the grant is awarded, you will have to choose which of the programs you would rather be funded by. Now, there are reasons why one might be more advantageous to your organization than the other. That's fine detail that we should probably get into in the Youth Reach process.
We have one very technical question about what is the entity or label for the grant funds to be sent via ACH. And I'm wondering specifically if you mean what name to look out for the deposit when you are getting those funds. And so my
Mm,
understanding is that it comes from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And
yes.
there is the state's website, Vendor Web, that offers more details about how to track your grant amount, when it's scheduled to go, when it was dispersed, etc. And we can put that link in the chat as well. And you'll just need your vendor code, which is seen on your grant contract, as well as the last 4 digits of your EIN number to log into the state system to see full
Mhm.
details of the grant disbursement and what that looks like. 'Cause technically, the payments come through the state comptroller's office, not from our agency directly.
Great answer. Thank you. And if you are an organization that receives funds from more than one Commonwealth of Massachusetts source, that vendor web site is really effective because you can sort the payments that have been made to your bank account, to your organization, um, by the source. So you can look specifically for Mass Cultural Council funding or other, you know, programs that might be funding your organization. Anything else?
Yes, a question on
Okay.
if if the kind of one grant per organization rule
Mm-hmm.
impacts, I believe they're asking about local cultural council
Ah,
grants.
that does not apply to local cultural council grants, and it does not apply to the Cultural Facilities Fund.
Um, One question is, with creative experiences, we are not the applicant ourselves, but a partner of the applicant. Does that still preclude us from applying?
I would like to encourage you to reach out to the Creative Experiences team to ask questions specifically about that grant program. I would hate to give you any information that's not 100% accurate, and they really are the experts on that.
There was another follow-up question on the NEA, just asking for further
Mhm.
clarification of, yes, it is great that you're holding firm in your values to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but if the NEA cuts funding, will that affect what you do? If so, how?
So our funding right now largely comes from the legislative appropriation. That is the great majority of it. We receive about, I think, 1.2 million from the National Endowment for the Arts. If for whatever reason um, we were not to receive that funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, then Mass Cultural Council would have to work that into the spending plan for fiscal 26. And that how that gets worked in, how that would be responded to is something that lives above my head. But you know, Mass Cultural Council would have to make choices about how to develop the spending plan for next year.
Those were all of the open questions in the Q&A. Are there any
Oh,
final questions at this time that someone would like to quickly type?
well,
None are coming in.
terrific. Well, they were great questions. And again, I just want to congratulate all of you for receiving grants in the first cycle of this grant program. It was a very large number of applicants, and we were, just hugely impressed by the great work that all of you are doing and proud to be able to support you. So again, if you have questions, you can reach out to us either at the organizations.massculturalcouncil I'm sorry, at masscultural@mass.gov, or you can reach out to your staff contact. And again, you can find the name of your staff contact in your account in our grants management system under the organization profile. And again, there's a tab that is specifically for staff contact. So again, thank you for being with us today. We look forward to receiving your annual reports and to the future. Thank you again.